Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Carly Dober from the AAPi. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Becoming Confident with Deliberate Practice in Your Work, the New Psychologist Competencies with Dr. Nathan Castle. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I live and work on Wurundjeri land, but I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. A recording of this live session will be available on the AAP website tomorrow. You'll receive an email as soon as it is available. Please add any questions or comments you have in the chat, as we have allowed some time for Q&A after the main presentation. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Nathan Castle. Dr. Nathan Castle is a certified member of the International Centre for Clinical Excellence and the International Deliberate Practice Society. He has published research on deliberate practice and provided deliberate practice supervision to over 100 psychologists across Australia, the US, and Europe. Nathan's Geelong Clinic Psychology Outcomes uses deliberate practice to provide training to his team, with the client results published since 2019 showing improvements in effectiveness every 2 years. Nathan is also co-director of Psychs in Schools, a program committed to using current science to develop new solutions to provide the best mental health care in schools. Psychs in Schools implemented deliberate practice, focusing on delivering therapy behaviours that are linked to better results. Their 2024 evaluation showed it is the most effective youth service in Australia compared to youth services with public treatment results. Thank you so much, Nathan. We're excited to hear from you today.
Thanks so much, Carly. And I'm really excited to present on this topic. I was mentioning to Carly before we started that I think I've been presenting on deliberate practice for a while now. It was identified in 2009. I certainly wasn't speaking about it then, but there's this huge uplift where people are really wanting to know more. And a big part of that is people want increased confidence, but also it's becoming part of our competencies. So it's something that we need to, I guess, get our heads around in this ever-changing landscape of being a psychologist. So today we're going to talk about becoming confident with deliberate practice. And I guess as a bit of disclaimer, we're going to be really practical today. We're going to talk a little bit about what deliberate practice is, a little bit about why we do it, but we're going to really focus on case studies, real world examples, right? Where people can tell us what they did and how their results improved across time. So I've had a lovely introduction by Carly, thank you. And these are my little boys, Felix and Ollie. And what I will say is I've done all this stuff around deliberate practice. I really believe that for us to enjoy our work, for us to, I guess, help the most people possible, at least part of our professional development should be about getting better. And that's what got me interested in deliberate practice. And in fact, one of the key kind of turning points for me was I treated a young woman in her 20s for drug use and BPD around 11 years ago or so now. And it was actually part of a study. She was completing outcome measures on the severity of her BPD, the severity of her substance use, and all these other areas of her life across treatment. And we finished treatment. I did 12 or 13 sessions with her. And she came up to me, I was an early career psychologist, and she hugged me and she's like, "You've changed my life." And I was so awkward because I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to get fired? Some client touched me. What am I supposed to do? And it was a really elating moment being a psychologist. But there's a but. When I looked at the results of what happened with this young woman, she got worse in her substance use the entire time. The severity of her BPD got more severe. And every marker of what I would call being effective was the opposite. She had deteriorated in my care. And knowing that, all I wished was, I wish I knew that before she left. 11 years ago, never seen her again, but thought about her a lot. And I think that that interaction for me sowed the seed of how do I become more effective? How do I know if I'm effective? and yeah, how do I help the most people possible? So that's what we're really going to focus on today, the people that we help. We're going to talk about what is deliberate practice and why it's now a competency for psychologists. We're going to break it down so it's easy to understand and implement in your work. And I'm going to give at the end of this a lot of books, training where you can get into the nitty gritty, right? But at the end of today, you're going to go, all right, I know what this is, and here's some initial steps that I can do. And if there's more interest in that and getting into all the detail, it's going to be there for you at the end of today. We're also going to show you how to do deliberate practice in a way to increase effectiveness. You know, we're going to tell you the things that you can focus on that make a difference so that we avoid you doing deliberate practice on things that aren't going to make any difference to your work, right? We already know what the things are that help clients more. And then we're going to explain the primary focus of deliberate practice to get your results and provide a key book. All right, let's get into this. Let's talk about the why of deliberate practice. If there's a solution like deliberate practice and it's going into our competencies, it means there must be a problem. And I'm going to explain the problem to you now. If you ask yourself and you reflect, why did I get into this? Why am I a psychologist? What motivates me to get up every day and listen to 5, 6, or 7 people tell me the worst parts of their lives, plus some celebrations, right? If there's one thing that I've learned about psychologists, if there's a sturdy belief here that is largely unwavering. It's going to be some version of, I want to help people. You know, I want to work hard to make a difference. I want to do a good job, right? Now, first of all, that is not a problem. That is a great thing. But I want to introduce to you the problem because despite all of us working hard, I've never met a lazy psychologist. I don't think they exist. You wouldn't be in this profession if you were lazy. Despite all of this, the real problem is that on average, psychologists get less effective for every year that they work. And what I mean by effective is psychologists help less people for every year that they work. And so if I simplify that, what I'm saying is if you help 70% of your clients in your first couple of years, the next couple of years, it's going to go to 69, then 68, then 67, right? Or the dropout's going to increase. People are less engaged. Now, the problem with this problem is that because we're so optimistic, because we care about our clients, and because this is an average, it's very subtle, right? It's not like you work for a few years and then everyone goes, Nathan sucks, I never want to see him again. All your clients are still saying, you know, you helped me. Just like the example I gave before, the hug, you've changed my life, right? And we are still helping people. But the research is very clear. This is 170 therapists with thousands, tens of thousands of clients, and they were tracked for almost 2 decades. And what they found is a little over 60% got worse. Some people stayed the same, and a very small percentage became more effective and helped more people. And it turns out those people that were getting more effective were doing deliberate practice. So if I invite you to one decision today, it's to tell you this. Psychology, therapy is effective. It's incredibly effective. It's more effective than Panadol for back pain. It's more effective than a lot of blood thinners. It's a lot more effective than many medical interventions. Nowhere here will I tell you it's not effective, right? But if you want to stay effective or over time get less effective, don't do deliberate practice. If you want to get more effective over time as a therapist, do deliberate practice. And I'm going to stay on this for 1 second. For any of you out there that have played the violin, the guitar, played basketball, got good at swimming, right? What was required for you to get better? Some kind of space where outside of the basketball game, outside of the guitar gig that you play, you're actually practicing and you're going, this is the song that I'm learning to play. I'm going to learn the G scale. Or in basketball, I'm not getting many of those foul shots. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to practice those things. I'm going to have a coach tell me, what am I doing wrong? Is the flick at the wrist wrong? And ultimately, you're going to see you're getting more of those shots in. I'm the least sportiest guy ever. I should really avoid any sport scenarios because some people are going to walk away from this going, I tell you what, he knows deliberate practice, but he knows nothing about basketball. That's fine. So I guess this is the thing that we've got to battle. This is why deliberate practice is part of the competency, because this large scale study showed us that on average, we're getting worse over time. And then it was replicated a few years later with even more people, and it showed the exact same thing. It's not because we're not trying, it's not because we're not effective. It's probably because we sit in a room where no one sees our work and our clients might not feel like they can tell us if things aren't going so well. So, this is my little research man. I tried to find the most stuffy person that I could on the internet, right? Because I kind of can hear what a lot of you people are saying or thinking in your minds, which is, yeah, but that's in research. That's not in real life, right? Which I kind of agree with, right? There's some research papers that I read that I go, yeah, is that actually happening in real life? Well, we can have a look at an experiment here. If that's not the case, if psychologists on average get better over time, if we had a look at provisional psychologists on placements and we evaluated how effective they were, then it should be the case that more experienced psychologists who are in private practice using Medicare or are in Headspace, these kind of places, it should be the logic that those services are more effective than a placement service, right? That's what we would expect to see in the real world if through experience we became more effective. Now we have some real world data here from Sykes and Schools. I will disclaimer my bias. I am one of the directors of Sykes and Schools. So that's important for you to know. But we do a rigorous evaluation of how effective the service is. And here's the interesting results. When you look at Sykes and Schools trainees, someone on placement, right, not registered, this is around 200 or so provisional psychologists on placement. They are more effective than the average psychologist from the Medicare evaluation that was published a few years ago, significantly more. Now it's publicly available data. Then we compared that to Headspace and significantly more effective. Now, did we just find a couple of hundred superstars? Perhaps. Perhaps by chance we stumbled upon amazing therapists, right? And the fact of the matter is that was just an anomaly. Maybe as well, what we would think is, well, they've got a lot of supervision and the support is why they're more effective. There's a lot of questions out. This isn't a randomized controlled trial. This is just real world data comparing one service to other services, right? But I suspect that the reason why provisional psychologists outperformed registered psychologists with decades of experience, because that is really what's captured on average with the Medicare evaluation, is because over time, if we work for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, where we're in a room and no one sees what we do, we're probably going to make the same mistakes and bring a few others along the way. When I look at some of the data of my colleagues who don't do deliberate practice, that's exactly what you see. Either it stays the same, if 70% of people got better, in 10 years, exactly 70% of people got better, or it starts to decline and 68% of people are getting better. This is why we are suggesting that deliberate practice may be something that you're interested in, not to compare to the best psychologists in the world. Who cares what they're doing, right? Again, you're likely really effective already on average. but to progress your effectiveness over time, to help more people. And I think this is what deliberate practice can offer that many can't. So professional development does not improve client results. Supervision, sadly, and I'm a supervisor, does not, there's no evidence at least that it improves results. Really, deliberate practice is the biggest strategy that we know to date in psychology improves results. And we can see it in other disciplines as well. Michael Jordan didn't just come out in the court and he knew what he was doing, right? Thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000s of hours with coaches practicing over and over, and then he could do it at the drop of a hat. So here's the question. What is improvement, right? What we do is not the same as basketball. We can't count how many shots we take. When we say what is improvement, what we want to think about here is what is something measurable that means the client got better. So not opinion. In the example I told you of the 20-something young girl that I treated, my opinion was before anything was measured, I was transformative in healing her issues around borderline personality disorder and substance use. The measurable information told me otherwise. Now, probably good that we're talking about this in BPD. There's a dialect there, right? Both things can be true. There is not one part of me that thinks that I didn't help that woman in some way, right? The capacity to have around 12 hours or so where someone is supporting you, providing you skills, empathy, validation, those things are not nothing. They're incredibly helpful. And I'm proud, in fact. And the other thing can be true that in terms of her clinical symptoms and the things that were wreaking havoc on her life, she got worse. And so what we want to find is let's keep that belief that the things that we do are helpful and healing, but also find something measurable that can tell us that someone is getting better. So let's have a look at some measurable metrics you can use. Examples of things that you can measure in therapy that improve, and you can improve them to help more people. Average number of sessions, right? The average number of sessions, the benchmark in psychology. Now, it kind of differs between different countries, but generally speaking, the average is 5.9 or 6 sessions. And I hear people say that can't be true. The manuals and protocols tell us 20. And on average, I think I am seeing clients for 20. What we often see is because when I think of my caseload, I think the same. I think of, I'm going to say random names, right? Amy, Sally, Beck, John. And I think of the people that I've seen for maybe a couple of years, right? And it actually biases my head. And I forget about Bill that came to 1 session and didn't come back. I forget about Chad that came for 2 sessions and then called me and said he didn't have enough money, he can't come anymore, right? So if you just pull out of your calendar system, whatever you use, Halaxy, Clinico, any of those, it can easily tell you the average amount of sessions you have. And more than likely, it's going to sit at about 6. If you're above that, guess what? Probably not worth improving it because you're doing a great job, right? You can also measure your dropout rate. The average amount of dropout rate in psychology is 21%. Okay. If we think about this is about not our egos, just helping more people. In our discipline, 1 out of 5 leave without letting us know, irregardless if they're getting better or worse. So it's a great area that we could measure. You could figure out what your dropout rate is. Maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 10%. You know, what I'd say is if your dropout rate is really low, 10% probably not worth working on. But if it's at 30%, you can absolutely use deliberate practice to improve. What else can you measure? The percentage of clients who improve from therapy. On average, this depends on the outcome measure you use, but just as a rule of thumb, 64% of clients improve. That's roughly where we would see things. And that's really effective. That's changing people's lives so that family and friends go, wow, this person is different. They're getting out of bed. They are doing the things that are important to them. Now, if that percentage is lower, that's something that you could use deliberate practice for. You could use deliberate practice for the number of clients who have a final session. Only 34% of clients don't have a final session. They just don't rock up and we go, oh, I guess I'm never going to see Susan again. Just even as we say that, that's weird, right? That is very, very odd. That amount of people. What you can see in these averages, and that's all they are, is that engagement is an issue in our industry. We do need to keep people motivated and consistently attending for the best outcomes. And then I've just added some really easy ones. I do a bit of deliberate practice with my team around this. How long it takes to write case notes. Just do 2 days, write your case notes and time it with your phone and figure out what the average is. Maybe it's 25 minutes. If you do some work with a supervisor or a coach to bring that down to 10 minutes, suddenly your self-care is better. You've got more brain space for your clients. They're likely to get better. And another one could be, looking at how many of your clients actually have a goal, right? Like you're aware of what their goal is. When we look at this, notice nowhere does it say CBT. Nowhere does it say DBT. Nowhere does it say schema therapy, EMDR. Add any model you want. Deliberate practice, you can use any model you want. You're completely free, right? Whatever you love to do in treatment, you do that. Deliberate practice is around, okay, well, let's look at the numbers and see where we can get people better, faster, keep them in treatment longer when it's indicated for them, of course, and those kind of things. And so I think if you just keep in your mind that this is not about models at all, you can see where the difference is between professional development that we usually do and something like deliberate practice. So, just like I said before, once you've measured something, find your baseline. Just take an average of your dropout rate, just put it in a crude Excel file, write it on a piece of paper. Honestly, it's not about collecting a year of data. You could do this in 2 days or 2 weeks. Example could be, I saw 20 clients and at the end of the first session, 10 had a therapy goal. Cool. Let's see if we can increase that number and utilize a coach or a supervisor to help you. I checked my dropout rate in Halaxy, which is just one of those calendar software things, and it was 30%. Awesome. Your baseline there for dropout. I timed my case note writing and it was on average 25 minutes. I think hopefully something's coming up for you here as well. There's a feeling, man, this is a bit vulnerable. This is a bit hard. I've got a bit of anxiety about doing this. And if that's the case, we're on the right track. Most people that I coach or supervise around deliberate practice, and certainly myself doing it, it's a vulnerable space, right? Particularly because we're trying to find a baseline that isn't that good, right? And so there's a lot of bravery, I think, and a commitment to your clients if you do decide that deliberate practice is something that you want to endeavor in. And the title of this is Increased Confidence. The reality is I'm much more confident as a therapist now that I've done deliberate practice because one, now I'm in control and I can improve things. And two, I also know some things that I just haven't been able to move on. And that's okay. I've come to an acceptance, right? You should have seen my effectiveness when I had my second child. It was really crap. And I'm fine with that because I choose my little 2-year-old or then 0-year-old over the effectiveness. It's not about being perfect, but it is about understanding with clarity about your work. So, this is the deliberate practice framework that we use for therapy. And to be honest, it's pretty similar to basketball, violin, guitar. So, we're going to talk about therapy. 4 components of deliberate practice are having a learning objective. That's what I was saying before. If you identify that dropout rate is maybe a bit of an issue, that's your learning objective, right? And you've got a baseline, whatever it is, 30%. Coach guidance. The assumed thing about deliberate practice is that if you knew how to fix it by yourself in the room, you probably would have done it. So a coach is like a supervisor, or sometimes they're called a deliberate practice coach, who observes videos or observes live sessions to understand what's going on. The same as when Michael Jordan is taking a shot, there is someone or multiple people next to him looking at the form and technique. And what you pay that person for is to identify your blind spots that you can't see. And this is where it elevates past professional development because it is tailored to you. You might be doing things that you're not aware of. And I'll tell you what I'm more than willing to share. If I have a client who's a man who's like beefcake and he's big and muscly, man, my assertiveness just drops. And what's interesting is when I get feedback from those men, they say, stop being fluffy with me, get to the point, right? So there's this big disconnect about what I am doing in the room with that particular client and what I should be doing for better outcomes. And I needed my coach, Alex, to identify that for me because I didn't even know what was going on. Now that he told me, I stepped back and go, of course that's happening. It's actually not that hard to fix, right? But that's what the coach does. And then they provide constructive feedback. Really important. This is a vulnerable space. So a coach or a supervisor needs to be able to hold the safety to inquire, what do you think is going on here? And to be able to provide not a script. In that scenario, Alex didn't say to me, Nathan, say X, Y, and Z to every muscly man you have, right? He said, try and be more assertive and clear. And the principle I want you to use just while you're learning is what I notice is. And so every time I wanted to be more assertive, I just use that little snippet, what I notice is. And it helped me if I was feeling a bit disconnected from this client to just jump in and do the work, right? And the last thing is successive refinement, which is you practice it and then you observe more videos or recordings and you make more updates. All right, that worked really well, but I still notice X or Y, right? And if you keep doing this, you can imagine and you keep measuring what your learning objective is, say it's dropout, say it's average number of sessions, you will see that number improve. And that's the final loop there, right? Like the basketball player who goes, I'm trying to get those foul shots. I can only get 50% of them. I get the coach says, flick your wrist. I practice it, practice it, practice it, practice it. And then I'm hitting 90% of shots. That is what we're doing here. And we're going to talk about actual case studies where people have identified their learning objective, got coaching, got principles to hit, and then achieved those. I want to stop here though and tell you that deliberate practice takes time. As you can start to hear how I'm describing this, a lot of people in a deliberate practice type of CPD will go, all right, well, how do I improve my results tomorrow? And what you're going to see from the case studies. And I think this is one of the only presentations, certainly I've ever done that had case studies, is that the time taken is a while. And I empower you to decide at the end of this, deliberate practice might not be for me necessarily in this kind of perfect format, or yes, that's what I want to do. And just like really excellent sports people and musicians, of people that learn guitar, maybe only 10% want to get hugely effective, right? And so it's not everyone, generally speaking, that does deliberate practice in this way. And I was actually mentioning to Carly before this, the competencies themselves don't specify that you do deliberate practice in the perfect framework that we're describing here, which is the actual framework. They more describe that there is a more deliberate approach to the way that you're developing yourself, which is measuring aspects of your work, right? So if you simply want to go away, you want to identify your dropout rate, that's what I keep on coming back to, but it could be any of those things, and try yourself to deliberately improve those kind of numbers, that's more what it's talking about. This is the scientific way to do deliberate practice. All right. So once we know what deliberate practice is, people start going, well, what the hell am I going to focus on? Right? If you want to improve your dropout rate, we've chosen what you're going to measure and improve on, but what do I need to do to get there? And this is a visual representation of the things that research identifies improves client outcomes, right? So for what I'm saying here is, you're not going to see here how to do, what is it, like values from ACT or exposure from CBT or something from ANJA. That is not here because there is no indication that getting better or more fidelity at those things improves outcomes. The types of things that you're looking for is therapy structure. So, for examples, get actionable feedback from your clients, right? Every session systematically. Is there anything that could be done different from today? Prepare your client for a collaborative ending, right? Could be something that you could work on, which is your client's getting better, and you say, "Hey, Bill, are we at the start, middle, or end of treatment here?" And what you're hoping for is that more of your clients go, "Hey, Nathan, I'm at the end of treatment. This is my last session, or I only want one more." That means you're getting more collaborative endings. Again, describing the rationale about your treatment to a client, enabling hope and expectancy. That's a big one because many clients describe their experience of therapy as like, I don't know what this is even about. I know what we talk about, but I don't really know what to expect, what is normal. So being able to explicitly describe to a client what is the role of me, what is the role of you. Some other evidence-based strategies are like goal consensus, right? What that means is that you know and the client knows what the goal of treatment is at any given session. And a hint here is if there's ever a goal that I read, a client's goal that says like emotional regulation, distress tolerance, any of those things, like absolutely not a goal. That is not what we're talking about because no client I've ever met even talks in those terms, right? The goal is in the client's terms. So I want to be romantically close to my wife, Marie. I want to drink less alcohol. I want to get back to the gym. I want to be more confident. These are the types of things that we identify as goal consensus, that the client wants it, you're aware of it, and you're looking on how our evidence-based practices can help them to reach that goal. And all of this is adapted from a document called the Taxonomy of Deliberate Practice, which I'm going to show you now, because you're going to walk away today. For those that want to engage in deliberate practice, this is going to be one of your first points of call. Okay. This was developed by Scott Miller and Daryl Chow, Daryl Chow being an Australian, one of the real pioneers in this deliberate practice area. And you can just Google it. It is free. They made it free for everyone, right? The taxonomy of deliberate practice outlines many different things that you can work on and gets you to self-rate what you're good at and what you're not so good at. And often your supervisor, you can get them to rate what you're good at and not so good at. And what comes out of this large document is it identifies your strengths and identifies some weaknesses that could be a target for your deliberate practice. So this is one for me, and it looks at structure. So the activity it's asking me to reflect about is, how do you start a first session? How would you rate, like how clear am I that I know exactly what I do in a first session? I go 6 out of 10. Okay, how do you start subsequent sessions in your second, third, and fourth? Like, I know exactly what I do there. I'm pretty clear. I can describe to people, and I think it's good. How do you close a session? I'm really clear on that, right? The next one, how do you formally elicit detailed and nuanced feedback at every session? If I step back and reflect, I go, 2 out of 10. And I'm starting to go, all right, if that's important, if the research indicates that's important, that might be something that I practice with my coach, right? And then you put in some notes there, and I'm putting in there my own motivation would be I want to empower my client's voice, and I don't request feedback every session, right? Importantly, there's some things that are going to be here that are rated low that you don't want to work on. Just because either you don't have time, you don't have the motivation, that's fine, right? So even here, we've got a low one on the relationship focus. I've rated 5 there. How do you mobilize clients' willingness to engage in a therapeutic process or activity? So that kind of like motivational interviewing type stuff. And just me personally, I don't want to do more MI stuff, to be honest. So I just choose not to do that. That's okay. You know, the reason why I'm highlighting this is there is a resource. It integrates all the research that we know on the topic. You can look at these areas of your work and you can get a lot more clarity, but ultimately it's up to you, right? There is no part of deliberate practice that says you have to do this, you have to do that. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. It is not an elitist type of endeavor. It is much more reflective, it is very personal to you, and it's a playground that you can get better over time. So, what does this look like? This is a picture of me with a client, although the client is actually my friend Trevor. And this is my actual coach, Alex, right? I worked with Alex for about 2 years. He lives in Prague, and we would meet at 7 p.m. every night for an hour. And he would watch my videos and he would provide me with guidance, right? And for about 5 months, my job was to have more therapy goals with my clients. The reason being that that therapy goal is the number one predictor of anything that we know that someone is going to get better. And that's where I started. And my baseline was pretty poor. Around 25% of my clients had a goal, which is interesting. I thought I had it in my head, but when I looked at it, it was mostly emotional regulation and distress tolerance, right? So in the real world, Alex would observe my session and usually would watch 10 or 15 minutes on an area that I thought that was relevant to this goal. And he would give some kind of constructive feedback. One that he would often give me is things like, your client is saying, I want less anxiety, and you're writing that as a goal. And he would say, well, it's not really a great goal because we all have anxiety. So I want you to work on something that is going to build something in this anxious person's life. So, all right, if you had less anxiety, what would the goal be? What would you see of as success? And in this instance, Trevor might go, oh, I could actually go to work function. I could be more responsive to my partner. Those things that are important to him, that would become the defining goal. And so what you notice is that it's very granular, what we're talking about. It's very focused on something that the research indicates from us from the taxonomy of deliberate practice creates improvements, and then really working on that. And you'll notice the timeframes of some of these case studies that I'm going to show you next. They're in terms of years or months, not days or weeks. So here's a case study. This is Jimmy. You can follow Jimmy's blog. His name's Jamoan Murphy. I was one of his coaches for a period on deliberate practice. And he identified that the average amount of sessions that his clients attended was 4.3 sessions. Now, remember, the average is 6. So this is a great focus for deliberate practice. And among other things, we identified some principles here on how to improve those average sessions. Number one, deepen emotional experience of the client, focusing on some emotional depth rather than just solutions. Attunement, building rapport through pacing and client-led guidance. And the last one, personalized goal setting, tailoring goals to fit the individual needs and styles of the client. And this is what he did in every session. He looked for opportunities while doing his own model of therapy, his own way. And sometimes he would have post-its behind the client in the background to remind him. And let's see if it worked. I wouldn't put it up if it didn't work. So between 2021 and 2024, he went from 4.3 average sessions, doubled it within 12 months, reached a plateau the next year, and then basically doubled it again. when you look at this, that is expertise. That is mastery. And the way that he achieved it was deliberate practice, focusing on that over a very long period of time. And now, roughly speaking, he's kind of 2.5 times better than the average psychologist around the world on average number of sessions. And what he says, his lovely quote is, keeping it simple is the key to become more effective. Often Jimmy would talk about formulations, conceptions, attachment, and we would just come back. It's like, well, they're good things to hold. They will help you clinically, but will they get you more engaging and your clients attending more sessions? Absolutely not. We're really clear on that. So let's come back to the focus. Got another case study for you here. Barry McInnes over in the UK. You can also follow him. He's got a blog as well. And his job, he's a great one, right? It's a real humbling endeavor. Barry's job was to go around to UK services like the AAPi and others, look at their numbers and tell them how to improve the service. And at some point, Barry looked at his numbers, but what he overlooked was that his dropout was really high, 30%, right? We're really aiming for around 20%, 1 in 5, roughly. So he did some work. He identified some principles. Notice these are not scripts that he has to say to every client. There's a lot of flexibility and playfulness. And what they identified was there was a principle. Let's assess motivation here, because that can be an indicator of someone dropping out. Let's adjust client expectations. Let's talk about timelines. So if Carly was my client or Barry's client, he would say pretty early on, probably the first session, hey, Carly, I reckon I'm going to see you for 8 sessions and you'll likely be done. You might need more, you might need less. That's up to you, but I reckon it's 8 sessions. That means that if this Carly's in the 6th session and she wants to drop out, she goes, oh, might as well do 2 more. I might get the results then, right? These are very simple strategies. Again, clarify goals. If Carly at the 4th session doesn't really know what they're going towards, more likely to drop out. And then also setting expectations. What is the norm? What is expected? What do you need to do to be able to get better? Which might look like Carly doesn't attend a session, goes, I'll be at the next session. He might actually say, I just want to let you know, I do want to see you at the next session. You're unlikely to get better if we keep having you not attend. This is his dropout between 2016 and 2019. 30%, really high. 12 months, he'd reached kind of the average. Another 12 months, he was at 10%. And now he's got that 8% dropout. We're never going to eliminate it, but that's an incredible dropout rate. He has upped his charm, his expectations, and all these things. And to be honest, I've spoken to Barry a lot. The thing is, once you get your head around it and you go, all right, this is what I'm doing, it's pretty enjoyable, right? You can actually have more focus in your sessions on what works, and you get that feedback loop that we don't really get other than our clients saying, oh, you're amazing, which is lovely. But you actually get this feedback loop that I'm getting better here. So I want to make sure that we've got time for questions, but I also want to be practical. What's your first steps here? We're going to talk about where you can get more information. First off, go find the taxonomy of deliberate practice. Just Google it. It's there for you for free. See if you can fill that out. Identify what you are naturally motivated to improve at that is measurable. It doesn't need to be the hardest thing. In fact, maybe it's probably the easiest thing, right? Get some progress on the board. Measure your baseline of that. Look at, what is that thing that you want to change and find an average for you. And then ask your supervisor, assuming that you have one, to start observing your sessions, either live. You can have a laptop in the corner while you're doing a session without their face being there, or you can record it if you feel comfortable doing that. And then start to see what comes out of that. See if naturally some of these principles come out. So if we just break it down, do one document, figure out what you want to change, and start your supervisor observing sessions. Okay? Really clear steps that you can take. Now, if you want to do more training on this, here's some recommendations. The Centre for Clinical Excellence is doing a first ever Australian time zone 3-day workshop in June. It's all about feedback-informed treatment, which ties into deliberate practice with Scott Miller, who identified and did most of the research on deliberate practice from 2009. So if you want to go to the source, it's online, it's 3 days, great training. So that would be a great option for you. If you want to book as a guide, now again, I'm going to claim my bias. I did write this book with some other wonderful people like Kay Frankham, Daryl Chow, Raylene Wicken, and Aaron Frost. But creating impact is pretty low cost, and it's going to actually guide you through your journey with deliberate practice. And if you want to do more of this type of work as perhaps a supervisor, or if you're a training psychologist watching today, then get in touch with Psychs and Schools. We've published research on this area. We do deliberate practice principles within all of our placements, and our supervisors, for example, we've invited most of them to the International Centre for Clinical Excellence training. So we're always increasing the capacity of our supervisors or provisional psychologists. So if you're interested, get in touch with us. I reckon I'm roughly right on time here, Carly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We've got just one question. How would you set up with clients to get their permission to record sessions to be able to review this with your supervisor or your coach?
Great question. So I recorded heaps of sessions in the past, and I would say the disclaimer is how we do this might have got better over time. But I think the starting point is in the consent form, having it written down. I may at times record a session for the purposes of improving my professional development or improving your treatment. It will only be observed by a supervisor who oversees my work. And then the other part of this is having a conversation with the client, right? So they might have signed that consent form at the start of treatment and going, hey, Carly, one thing that's really important to me is that we're doing the absolute best work. I often do record sessions and go through that with a senior psychologist supervisor so that they can identify, is there anything in your treatment that could be adapted so that you get better results? So noticing that we're pitching it to them about where's the benefit for them. And then I usually say something like this. I'll usually say, so would that be all right if I hit record today? I've got a camera over in that corner. 50% of clients say yes, 50% of clients say no. It's completely up to you what you want to do. And then you're empowering them. They might generally be okay with it, but maybe that session they want to talk about sex or something. So they're like, no go. And then it's just letting them know, if you ever want me to destroy that recording, you can just shoot me an email and I'll destroy it immediately.
Perfect. Thank you. And also, a lot of the focus is on the data of the psych. What about the outcome measures, for example, the DAS-21 for the client? Are you saying that they're not as good of a measure anymore of client outcomes?
I love this question. Whoever said that, massive clap. I've done this presentation many, many times on at least the topic. And I find that when I talk about outcome measures, I can lose about half the crowd, right? Really, the outcome measures are probably the best way to do it. So in your DAS-21, if you're administering that over time with clients, that's a great way to figure out what percentage of your clients are getting better. So you can do that within NovaPsych Insights. You can press a button and it'll just tell you 65% of people are getting better. So no, that's a great one. But I think for the purposes of today, because I want to reach the biggest crowd, I didn't want people to think, well, I can't do deliberate practice if I don't have outcome measures. And that's why I focused on average amount of sessions, dropout, all those things that you don't absolutely need outcome measures for. But yes, traditionally speaking, outcome measures are usually one of the best measures for us to use.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Nathan. That was fantastic. One more question. Aside from the DAS-21, do you have a favourite outcome measure?
Good question. Maybe a divisive topic. My answer is choose the outcome measure that aligns with what you think changes in your work, right? About 6 years ago, I used a kind of distress measure that I thought worked really well. And then a couple of years later, I realized I wanted a distress measure with a suicide item because that was important to me. And then more recently, I've been using a well-being measure, a brief well-being measure, because actually, I guess over reflection over time, we all grow. I do want to reduce people's distress, but I think more than that, I want to improve their quality of life, regardless of any clinical symptoms. So if you believe that what you change in your client's life is well-being, look up a well-being measure. If you feel that what you change in a client's life is like more symptoms, look up symptom measure. If you're a relationship expert and that's your focus, do that measure. What we know from deliberate practice and outcome measures is it doesn't matter what measure you use. They're all slightly different, got good and bad sides to them. What matters is that you do it. So I'm much more of a fan of you just doing what you believe in rather than thinking there's a perfect measure. Because if I tell you my measure today, I might change it in 12 months. So yeah, I hope that's a okay enough answer that's not too abstract.
Thank you. And would the average client drop out or number of sessions change with the type of clients? For example, mental health care plan under Medicare versus work cover, etc.
This is perfect. And a shout out to to one of our psychologists, Emma at Psychology Outcomes, because she actually nailed this. It's so funny that you bring it up. So she said, all right, well, if I want to change the average amount of sessions, I should just move from Medicare to NDIS because traditionally speaking, NDIS has more of a recurring flavor to it, right? And I said to her, I was like, yeah, of course you can. It probably doesn't mean that people are necessarily getting better, but that would be one way to do it. So, coming back to your question, yes, funding does impact things like dropout. And that's somewhere sometimes where it's the learning. You know how I said before, my effectiveness went down when I had my second boy, Felix. It's just learning. I don't really want to change it. And so, you might find that, say, Kay Frankham, one of the real experts in this space, she was largely when she was working clinically doing WorkSafe. And I asked her one day, she's really big into deliberate practice, being more effective. And I was like, wouldn't work with WorkSafe impact your effectiveness? Now, this is opinion, by the way. She was like, yeah, I reckon it probably does, but I don't care. I love working with WorkSafe, right? So it's not about necessarily having the best dropout rate or the most effective. It's just progressing. If you're here, let's help you to get to there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Nathan. That's been fantastic. Please get in touch with Dr. Nathan Castle and have a wonderful day, everyone.